Hey, what is up, mortals? Welcome to Season 3 Part 3. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying, sit back and relax, you're in for a treat. So, we begin. The attack on the training camp was devastating for UA. Not only had they been compromised for the second time, one of their students got kidnapped. To make matters worse, other students were harmed, with two of them being on the very verge of death. These two were Izuku and Todoroki. Suffering from their horrendous battle damage, Shoji and Takoyami had dragged them both to safety after they lost consciousness, all while praying that it wasn't too late for either of them. Luckily, they just managed to survive, and were both rushed to the hospital for surgery. After a few days of unconsciousness, Izuku finally awoke. He opened his eyes and was immediately forced to strain them from the light that was above. The boy felt dizzy, unable to tell where he was. As he tried to analyze the situation, he then thought that he could hear a voice next to him, but it was far too muffled for him to comprehend it. Izuku focused on the voice more and more, his hearing and vision slowly coming back to him as he did. Eventually, he could actually tell what was being said. "Midoriya, can you hear me?" it said, sounding incredibly worried. The green-haired boy still had to strain his eyes to see that it was Kirishima. And he wasn't alone. Behind him was almost the entirety of Class 1A. And they all looked equally concerned for his well-being. "Yes, I can hear you," Izuku then responded, his voice being so hoarse that one could barely make out what he was saying. The students were all relieved upon hearing this, all letting out a heavy breath as they did. Izuku then tried to sit up, but immediately fell back down when the pain hit him like an electric shock. "Take it easy. You've sustained a lot of damage. You had a hole punched through your abdomen, and many of your bones were broken," Uraraka then said, placing one of her hands on the greenette in an attempt to aid him. Izuku grunted through the pain, as he then with Uraraka's help managed to sit up while saying, "Well, it sure feels like I've had a hole in my stomach." With a strained and hoarse voice, everyone looked worried at first, but they then smiled when seeing that Izuku was well. The green-haired boy smiled with them all, until he had a sudden realization when analyzing everyone that was present. "Junior, where is he?" he shouted, his concern showing in his voice. Everyone became gloomy again upon hearing this, keeping their gazes low to the ground as they did. No one answered the anxious boy, until Shoji spoke up. "Bakugo tried to save you, but that ended up being his downfall. They took him, and we couldn't do anything about it," the multi-armed teen said, voice being heavily weighed by the guilt of being unable to do anything. Izuku's was broken upon hearing this, with nothing but an inkai-black despair slowly seeping into it. He clenched his fists hard and gritted his teeth, as he with a pained voice then spoke. "Damn it, I couldn't save him. When he needed me the most, I was unable to do anything. I let myself be defeated by some villain. Yet I call myself invincible." The room was silent once again, for no one knew what to say. They could do nothing but watch as the greenette beat himself up, all while his clenched fingers started getting coated in blood. A single tear dropped from Izuku's eye, as he then spoke once more. Todoroki was there too. "Is he okay?" he asked, desperately trying to change the subject. The room remained in the same mood, as Shoji then answered the question. "He started fighting the villain that had mutilated you, and he was also horribly injured. He got desperate and had no choice but to kill his opponent," Shoji said, his voice not changing as he did. Izuku only frowned and grunted upon hearing this, not wanting to imagine what Todoroki was going through right now. His mind, however, jumped onto something else the second he heard that Todoroki was injured. "Is he in this hospital?" Izuku then asked, looking towards Shoji as he did. The multi-armed teen looked a little confused upon hearing this, as he pointed one of his thumbs towards the door while saying, "Yes, he's in a room down the hall." "Why are you asking?" Izuku didn't give a reaction as he heard this. He just took a long breath before exhaling heavily. What he then did put everyone in more shock, as the greenette dragged himself out of the bed. They all moved out of instinct in an attempt to stop him, but by the time that they reached the bed, Izuku had already collapsed to the floor. "What are you doing, Deku?" Uraraka exclaimed, as she rushed over to Izuku. The green-haired boy grunted heavily, like an injured animal, as he leaned against the wall while dragging himself up to his feet. The students didn't know how to feel about this. Izuku had just woken up from heavy injuries and should still be bedridden, yet he was standing up on what could only be described as glass legs as if his life depended on it. The green-haired boy didn't answer Uraraka, as he took a step forward. He then took another step, continuing to lean against the wall, as he walked his way towards the door. "Where are you going?" Uraraka then asked, her voice being permanently alarmed by Izuku's unstable form. The greenette slid the door open in silence. Before answering, "I need to see Todoroki," he said, grunting through the pain as he did. Everyone was even more alarmed now. As Izuku proceeded to slowly walk down the hallway while clutching his stomach, Uraraka's concern now turned into a little frustration. As she followed behind Izuku and shouted, "Why can't that wait? You're still recovering and you could injure yourself again." Izuku stopped for only a split second after hearing this, as he turned his gaze slightly backwards while growling, "Then I'll injure myself again," with ferocious animosity. Everyone shivered after hearing these words. It wasn't just what Izuku had said. It was his voice. He sounded like an animal, one that was desperate for survival and was willing to do anything for it. They watched him tread down the hallway, but they didn't try to stop him anymore. He kept limping his way forward, passing many rooms as he did, until he eventually found what he was looking for. The green-haired boy quickly slid the door open, showing impatience beyond comprehension. On the other side of the door was Todoroki, lying awake in his hospital bed. The bicolored teen looked fine at first, but upon close inspection it was clear that he wasn't. He was covered in bruises, wore a bandage around his forehead, and part of his left arm was covered in black burn marks. Izuku couldn't even begin to imagine the pain that his friend was going through. But he didn't get to lament it any longer as Todoroki finally noticed his presence. "Midoriya, why are you here?" the bicolored teen asked, genuinely shocked to see his green-haired friend. Izuku limped his way into the room as he answered by saying, "I came to see you," before taking a seat next to the bed. Todoroki was still a little shocked and wanted to smile upon hearing this, but he couldn't bring himself to do so. He just looked gloomy, his eyes looking towards his feet. As Izuku broke the silence once more, "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" the green-haired boy said, his voice trying to dull out the pain that he was feeling. Todoroki was silent at first. Then he spoke. "No, I'm pretty far from okay," he said, his voice sounding as cold as it usually did. Izuku looked down upon hearing this, for he was expecting this kind of answer, as Todoroki then continued by saying, "Bakugo was right there in front of me, and I couldn't do anything. My friend was kidnapped, and I was too weak to stop it. That's not all. I killed a man." With a voice that showed pain and defeat, Izuku raised his head upon hearing the last part, as he looked towards Todoroki and said, "I'm not here to tell you whether what you did was right or wrong. That is for you to decide. What I will say is that you had no other choice. You did what you needed to survive." In an attempt to reassure his friend, this didn't reassure Todoroki in any way. However, as he proceeded to say, "I know. I just can't get this damned image out of my head." With a slightly more agitated voice, Izuku was now confused, as Todoroki clenched his fists before continuing, "Every time I look back at the scene I see my father. No matter how hard I try, I can't remember the face of that villain. I just see my father right before he gets burned to ash. And I don't know what to think about it. It's easier to accept if I only try to remember my father by his worst qualities. But I don't want to do that. Even if it's fake, I at least want to pretend that he was a good person. But now it just hurts no matter how I try to perceive him." The bicolored teen cried out, pain and sadness being more prominent than before. Izuku also carried a look of sadness, being forced to watch his friend weep over his losses. He was desperate to try and comfort Todoroki in some way, so he instinctively reached out for his left shoulder. The only reaction he got, however, was a grunt of pain before getting his hand shoved away. The two now sat in silence, unsure of what to say anymore, until the hospital door slid open again. "Are we interrupting something here?" a voice then asked, catching both Izuku and Todoroki off guard. The two teens looked towards the door only to see Aizawa, along with both All Might and Recovery Girl. The teens were a little surprised, as Todoroki calmed himself before saying, "No, we're fine." Aizawa could clearly tell that something wasn't right, but right now he had other things to address. "All right, Midoriya. We need to speak with you in private," the tired teacher said, as he looked towards Izuku. The green-haired boy looked at them with an odd expression, one that Todoroki couldn't identify, as if he knew exactly what Aizawa wanted. "I think I know what you want, and I think that Todoroki deserves to hear it as well. Also," the greenette paused, before looking towards All Might and continuing, "I think that All Might should share his secret too." Skillshare. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. With the services Skillshare provides, you can access many in-depth tutorial videos on basically anything you want to learn. Each class that they have is bound to help you with your creative endeavors. Do you want to learn how to make videos like this one? Do you know how to write scripts or edit audio? Skillshare has you covered, and with our link, you can have a 14-day free trial. So what are you waiting for? Click the link now and get 14 days worth of classes free. Link in description below. Now it wasn't just Todoroki that was confused. Aizawa was as well. He didn't know what Izuku was referring to. And All Might's reaction didn't help at all. The blonde hero looked shocked at first, but he quickly changed into one of understanding when he looked at Izuku. All Might then gave a nod towards Aizawa, who quickly collected himself before looking at his green-haired student and asking, "I'll get straight to the point. What are you exactly?" With his usual tired voice, Todoroki was even more confused by this question. But he would only get worse when Izuku responded by saying, "I'm not human," with a voice that was way too calm. Everyone, even the ones that had asked the question, were shocked upon hearing this. It wasn't just that it was unexpected. It was very blunt. Things only got more bizarre from there. As Izuku began to elaborate, he began to explain that he was part of an alien race called Viltrumites. He then explained that they go out of their way to help other civilizations on other planets, and that his father was tasked with protecting Earth. No one knew how to react to this, for it was far too absurd. But, at the same time, Izuku showed no signs of lying, and there was even evidence to back up what he was saying. This does explain a few things. For instance, none of your powers come from a quirk, Aizawa then added, fully acknowledging what his student had just told him. Aizawa did intend to say something else, but he was interrupted when Todoroki decided to speak. "Bakugo, does he know? Is that what the two of you were hiding from me?" the bi-colored teen asked, sounding like he understood but was disappointed. Izuku shared a slightly pained expression as he looked at Todoroki and said, "Yes, he knew. I'm sorry that we didn't tell you. But this isn't something that I can just openly share with anyone." With a voice that mirrored his expression, Todoroki could understand Izuku's reasoning. But there was still something that bothered him. Then why was Bakugo the sole exception? Aizawa asked, voicing Todoroki's question long before he could. Izuku looked ready to give his response, but he too was beaten to it. "Actually," All Might then said, stopping Izuku dead in his tracks. Everyone turned their attention to the blonde hero, waiting for him to continue. What they saw instead shocked them, but for different reasons. The blonde hero had deflated, revealing his skinny form to everyone in the room. Of course, Recovery Girl and Aizawa already knew, but they didn't expect All Might to show his form to the students. It also didn't help that Izuku, unlike Todoroki, wasn't at all surprised by All Might's skeletal form. The skeletal man then breathed a heavy sigh before he said, "I might be able to answer that question." With his usual voice, everyone was immediately knocked out of their episode. As All Might began to explain, he started by explaining his injury, how it happened and that he now has a time limit because of it. He then proceeded to tell them about One for All, how it was created, and that Bakugo was the 9th user. Everyone was shocked by this information, except for Izuku. As All Might then finished by saying, "If young Midoriya knows about One for All, I suspect that young Bakugo told him in exchange for his secret. Or better yet, they both figured each other out and decided to come clean about it." Now everyone turned towards Izuku for a response to All Might's theory, which came in the form of a nod. "So you're an alien, and Bakugo is destined to be the next symbol of peace. No wonder I couldn't catch up. Neither of you obey the same rules that I do," Todoroki then added, his voice sounding like it was a mix between realization and frustration. Izuku could feel the frustration coming from Todoroki, but he didn't know what he could say to make it any better. He didn't get any time to think about it as Aizawa then spoke up again. "Well, now we have more information. If Bakugo was captured, it could very well have something to do with One for All, which makes this far more urgent than it was before. Not only that, we now know for certain that Midoriya is actually quirkless, and we might be able to use that in some way," the tired teacher said, scratching his chin as he did. Everyone understood his reasoning, especially Izuku, but they were slightly alarmed by what he had said at the end. The way that Aizawa had said it was as if he was willing to let Izuku break the rules against using quirks, then state that he's quirkless. Of course this would be the last resort, but the fact that he was even contemplating it made them a little concerned. "Regardless of what we now know, I am more concerned about the doctors at this hospital figuring out the truth just like you did," Izuku then said, voicing another concern that he has had for a while now. This concern was quickly resolved, however, when Recovery Girl said, "I've already taken care of that. I came here to treat you personally, and no one else has access to your files. You're lucky that your biology is different. Had you been human, you would have been lucky to end up like All Might." With her usual calm voice, Izuku exhaled heavily upon hearing this, as he realized what this meant. Both Aizawa and Recovery Girl have been protecting him. They could have easily shared this information, but instead they stopped to hear him out. The room then fell silent for a few seconds, until the three heroes moved towards the door. "We have to prepare for the raid. Get better soon," the skeletal All Might said, before buffing up and adding, "Young Midoriya, I thought that you would be glad to hear that your father will be taking part in the rescue mission." He said something about doing it for your sake. With his usual booming voice, Izuku was very relieved to hear this. Now knowing for sure that his friend would be safe, the teens watched as the heroes left. Leaving them alone once again, they were silent, unsure of what to say. Until Todoroki finally spoke up. "So there was a reason for Bakugo calling you an alien," the bi-colored teen stated. Izuku giggled a little upon hearing this. As he said, "Yes. What did you think it was for?" Before chuckling again, Todoroki followed suit in the laughter. Realizing how dumb his statement had been, the two of them laughed together for a while, relieving the tension between them, until the door slid open again. "You need something, Kirishima?" Izuku asked, being rather curious about his intentions. The redhead looked a little reluctant, taking a deep breath before speaking his mind. "I'm going to go and rescue Bakugo." Both Izuku and Todoroki were shocked to hear this. As Kirishima then continued to explain, Yaoyorozu put a tracker on one of the Nomas. "I'm going to ask her to make another receiver, then I'm going. I know that you and Bakugo were pretty close, so I'm here to ask if you're coming with me," the red-haired teen said, sounding confident about the fact that both Izuku and Todoroki would say yes. His hopes were crushed. However, when Izuku responded, "I think that's a bad idea. I'm not going," the brunette said, his voice sounding as calm as it usually did. Kirishima was genuinely shocked to hear this, as he asked, "Why? Shoji and Takoyami have already agreed to go with me. So why aren't the two of you?" With his shock clearly present in his voice, Izuku was unaffected by this, as he responded by saying, "If Shoji and Takoyami really decided to join you on your rescue mission, you should tell them that my dad, Omni-Man, is helping the heroes. You'll see why I said no." With his usual calm voice, Kirishima staggered upon hearing this, for he knew what it meant. If he told this to the others, they would bail on him without a second thought. But he still felt that he wanted to do something. "What happened to then I'll injure myself? Where is the guy that was willing to hurt himself just to help his friends?" The redhead then shouted, his voice getting more aggressive as he spoke. Izuku went from calm to annoyed in less than a second. As he then said, he went to rest after hearing that his friends would be safe. With an annoyed tone, Kirishima was thrown off by this, unsure of how to respond. He has seen Izuku get annoyed with both Bakugo and Todoroki numerous times, but he has never been on the receiving end of it. He was unable to speak, almost trembling by the animosity that he was feeling. "Did you need anything else?" Izuku then asked, knocking the redhead out of his staggered state. Kirishima still couldn't say anything. He just shook his head before leaving through the door. Both Izuku and Todoroki sighed heavily after the door closed. They both wanted to help Bakugo, but there was no need for that since Omni-Man himself was on the case. They just hoped that Kirishima, despite his desperation, would understand that. The two of them then tried, but failed, to relax, telling themselves that things would be all right. They closed their eyes and took a deep breath, unaware of the plans that were brewing behind their backs. Outro. Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed. Before you leave, we would just like to let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video. So goodbye and have a divine day.